Good morning and welcome to this session on technology in teaching and learning. My name is Punya Mishra and I'm Associate Dean for Scholarship and Innovation at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. I am really excited to be here today with you. A little bit about my background. I have an undergraduate degree in engineering, after which I got a degree in design, hoping to become an educational filmmaker. Ended up getting my PhD in education, and for the past 25-30 years, I have been an educator, a researcher, particularly in the fields of educational technology, creativity, teacher learning, and teacher education. I'm, of course, a husband, a parent, and a former school board member. So, as you can see, I have seen education and thought about education and worked in this field for a long time now. My research has focused on what is it that teachers need to know to intelligently integrate technology in their teaching. But before I jump into that, I want to go back 11 months to February 2020, before this thing called COVID-19 was upon us. At that point in time, just a couple of countries had had their schools closed. But in 2 months, almost the entire globe had shut down. And so in these 2 months, 194 countries and 1.6 billion learners were out of school. And we had to deal with what we call remote learning. Suddenly, we were all part of an unprecedented global educational social experiment that continues even today. In some ways, COVID-19 has shown us that we are dependent on technology. However, what is not clear is what is an educational technology. We argue that there is really no such thing as an educational technology. I mean, think about the scientific calculator. How many people do you see walking around with a scientific calculator? And there are dissertations that have been written about how scientific calculators can be used to teach mathematics. The problem is that it is a single function device. What everybody does have is this, which can very easily become a scientific calculator. And that is not even talking about all these different kinds of apps that allow us to explore space and time and physics and chemistry and biology and to connect with each other in powerful ways. There is indeed an app for that. But before COVID-19, when I used to talk to educators about having cell phones in classrooms, most teachers used to talk, were concerned about this idea of loss of control. And what they meant by loss of control was that, they were teaching, let's say, the Pythagorean theorem. One kid would be on YouTube or somebody else would be texting. But I always felt that was not real lack of control, because you could pass rules against that, you could block websites and so on. But real lack of control is when you are teaching the Pythagorean theorem and some kid finds another proof that you did not know. That undermines and questions your function as an educator in front of the classroom. And that is true lack of control. And the question is, what do we do about that? But coming back to this issue of technology, one of the problems with technology is that most technologies have not been designed for education. When we moved remote back in March, we had to use all kinds of tools, whether it is Zoom or it is Microsoft Teams or Google Docs or Google Classrooms, which were most probably not designed for education. But what did we do? What did educators do? We redefine technologies. We are creative. We want to do the right thing, so we find ways through. The thing is, why is this important? And it is important because only repurposing makes a technology an educational technology. These technologies have not been designed for education, but we educators see in them possibilities and potentials. And this repurposing, thus, is a creative and innovative act. And this is important because technology can change both how and what we teach. So let's look at how technology changes how we teach. So one of the greatest innovations in our lifetime as an educational innovation is Google. It has allowed students and learners who may be in Pakistan or in Phoenix, Arizona, or in Bangladesh or Azerbaijan to access information at a scale that was never possible before. More information at your fingertips than ever in the history of human civilization. Now, that is an amazing fact. But we also know that a lot of that information is not necessarily vetted, may not be right. There is a lot of fake news out there. Which brings me to my 23rd law of parenting. which goes as follows. For facts, go to Google. For wisdom, come to me. And the point here is that as educators, our role changes when technologies come into this space. And so this idea of lack of control that I talked about before is an important one for us to think about. What is it that we want to control, and what is it that we want to let go? So facts, maybe Google can take care of it, but for wisdom and insight, you need to come to the educator. And the amount of information out there with MIT OpenCourseware, other OpenCourseware systems, with Web 2.0, with people accessing information through multiple devices, and this whole social web that we have built, the massively online open courses. I recently had a chance to speak to some students in Nepal for a show that I do every Saturday called Silver Lining for Learning. And it was amazing that these kids started taking these massively open online courses to learn English, and one of them got interested in astronomy. Another student got interested in writing fiction. And they were in Nepal with barely some internet access, and they could now access knowledge and information and ideas in a way that was never possible before. So technology fundamentally changes how we teach. It's important to understand that technology also changes what we teach. If you look at any domain of human activity, whether it's mathematics or art or science or physics or music, journalism, political science, everything has been transformed due to technology. The way we create music, the way we share music, the way we pay for music, the way we listen to music has dramatically changed. So one of my favorite examples is this one, which is the periodic table of elements. And if you look at that set of elements which is at the bottom, those two rows, ideally they should be in the middle of the table, not like this. But why do we have this and not this? As it turns out, it is a function of the technology of print, where we tried to shove in a lot of information in the cells and the tables became too long, and so we took this whole set out and put aside. This has significant implications for how students learn chemistry. There is research that shows that students have a difficult time because of the design of the periodic table. And even more interesting, this is not the only design of the periodic table there is. Chemists have created three-dimensional versions, spiral versions, really strange and weird versions. And none of them are wrong. They are all right in their own way, have their own strengths and their own weaknesses. However, we do not give access to these multiple representations to our students. And this is another space where the digital technologies allow us to represent information and knowledge in ways that are really powerful, because one click or a zoom or a swipe can take you to different representations. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, we have talked about the technology changes how we teach, the technology changes what we teach. But where does all this happen? And this happens in particular contexts. It happens in a classroom where every child has a device. It happens in classrooms where students get to go to a lab for a few minutes a day, or other classrooms where students can walk around, or in these situations of remote learning that we are facing today. So, if you think about it, the four things that I've talked about so far are technology, the tools that we use to convey information, knowledge, to share, to communicate and connect with each other. Content, subject matter, which is physics, chemistry, math, biology, art, engineering, what have you. And pedagogy, the manner and approach that we take to convey this information. And all of these are bounded in particular contexts. However, these cannot be seen as being independent and separate from each other. And it's important to see the most important overlap where technology, pedagogy, and content come together in specific contexts. And this is called the TPACK framework, or the total package for teacher knowledge for technology integration. And it's important to understand that this is not just about digital technologies, that a pencil and paper and a slate are as much a technology as a computer or the World Wide Web. That teaching is always about something that needs to be conveyed, some pedagogical approaches that we take to convey them, and the tools and technologies that we have to make that happen. This TPACK framework was something that we developed back in 2006. It has been cited a lot. There are a couple of handbooks that we have been part of writing. It has been incredibly influential in the work of teacher education and teacher professional development. And what has been very meaningful for me is how it has become a part of sort of regular teacher education and practice across the world. And what it has demonstrated is the importance of going beyond just the technology, to think about the processes and experiences and how we design them for student learning. As John Dewey said, that all genuine education comes through experience. That does not mean that all experiences are genuinely or equally educative. And I think that we need to understand that technology can help us see, but only if we see technology the right way. I know all of us know about the Khan Academy and its resources in these videos. So one day I asked myself this question: how does Salman Khan learn? And then I found this video of an interview that he had that I'd like to share with you.
I approach it from what my brain would like to see. Like, what would the ideal, and for me, in history in particular, and I don't feel like I got this in the history books, and even now when I prepare, I'm not getting it from the history books on my shelf, is like, I like to see a scaffold, I like to see a map, I like to, what is the Holy Roman Empire? Like, what is that now?
Well,
like
the Ottoman Empire.
The
Yeah,
Ottoman,
right.
what are these things? People can just keep referring to them, but if I can't, so I like to, so what I do is, for history, I immerse myself in as much as possible. I usually read Wikipedia entry first, just to get the
Same thing I
scaffold.
do.
And the beauty now, also Wikipedia, if I find cool maps along the way, I copy and paste. I make sure they're in the public domain. I copy and paste, stick it on my my little Blackboard art program, and sometimes I'll draw out a timeline just to make sure I get the years right. But the main thing I do, whether it's history or chemistry or anything, is get the scaffold and then really immerse myself for however long it takes, and then make sure that I can make intuitive connections between everything that happens, and and understand why something, if I'm doing it on the neuron, why, a biology book will tell you, okay, the signal goes across because there's a myelin sheath. And I'd kind of ponder it a bit, and then I was like, well, it's kind of like a fiber optic system, and one's kind of amplifying the signal, but if you amplify too, and then I'd call up some buddies who are either biologists or communications engineers, whatever. I was like, does this make sense? They're like, no, I think you're right. And so it's a big deal for me to, if I'm doing biology, why does the myelin sheath make the signal go faster? If it's history, wait, why did this artillery captain all of a sudden come to power? Like weren't there other people around? Like, these obvious questions are important for me to answer.
Yeah.
And what's really cool is sometimes you call a buddy and you're like, I know you're gonna think I'm stupid when I ask you this, and you're probably gonna think I have no business making a video on this considering I'm asking you this question, but why does the sarcoplasmic reticulum release these ions when this happens? And they're like, you know what, we don't know.
So here's a summary. This is how Salman Khan learns. He immerses himself, he scaffolds and annotates, he makes intuitive connections to understand why, he ponders, makes analogies, he calls up some buddies, he asks obvious questions, and most importantly, however long it takes him, he takes time to figure it out. And then he designs and creates a video. He puts it out in the world, people give feedback, and he redesigns it, changes it as his understanding evolves. What's fascinating for me is how Salman Khan recommends that everybody else learn. His recommendation is just watch the video. What's wrong with this picture? In some ways, the way Salman Khan himself learns is deeply, deeply appropriate and correct with everything we know about how learning can and should happen. But why does he deny that to our students? And I think that is an important question we need to ask ourselves when we think about the role of technology in teaching and learning. I'm going to give a couple of examples here of what I think are sort of creative uses of technology for learning. Here is a school in Italy which computed the distance to the moon by downloading MP3 files, where when mission control was talking to Neil Armstrong or whoever on the Eagle, and there was a faint echo, and that echo emerges from the fact that the signal bounces back and forth. And you could go into Audacity and actually measure how much that gap is, how much that echo is. And through that, compute the distance to the moon to the level of accuracy that was actually quite impressive. Now, what is creative in this was that the teacher thought of Audacity, which is an audio manipulation tool, as being a data analysis tool. So that's an example of creative repurposing in an appropriate way for the content, for the pedagogy. The second example that I want to give is of word problems. And this is like a classic word problem in a typical math textbook, to find the volume of this shape, which is a truncated pyramid, and so on. Now, if you see A, B, C, D, E, those steps there, they literally walk the student through the problem. So the student is not really computing anything or figuring anything out. They're just being stepped through it. So how could we make it better? So one way to make it better is remove that A, B, C, D, E and have them figure it out. But can we make it even better? So this is an experiment I did with some teachers that I was working with in Chicago. I just stepped out into the street.
Full time the title changes to an examiner.
And the question I asked was, what is the volume of the yellow parking cone shown here? All the information you need is contained in the video. Now understand what this does. What this does, it completely relegates the equations as something that you can look up and figure out. What it forces people to do is think about, what is the height of the pyramid? How can I figure that out from the fact that the people walking by? How do I know what the base of the pyramid is? This is real mathematics. Third example. One question that I'm always asked is, can online be as good as face-to-face? And this is particularly important in this COVID times when we work remotely. And my response to this has always been that. And what I try to do is turn the question on its head and ask, can face-to-face be as good as online? Because think about if this idea that we could learn anywhere, any place was a given, and then we say, oh, no. What we need you to do is come into this room for a few hours a day, and that's when the learning is going to happen. So here's an example that I have in my teaching that I've used, which is something that one can do online that one actually has a really hard time doing face-to-face. So one of the undergraduate classes I used to teach was an introduction to educational psychology, and we would start that class by showing them a magic trick. And this magic trick claims to read your mind and make a prediction. So clearly that's not true. The computer is not reading your mind. What it is doing is taking advantage of the limitations of our cognition. And then I would ask students, how did this trick work? Now in the online discussions, I could actually constrain the fact that students cannot see other people's responses till they have entered their own. That is hard to do in face-to-face. Because in the face-to-face, once the right answer is given, the whole class can just agree as if they knew it all along. So the answer to the question, can online be good as face-to-face, is it depends. It depends on how we design the learning experience. There are positives for each of them, and it is for us as educators, as designers of education, to think about that. An important aspect to think about is in this age of digitality where so much is available for free, what is the value of something in the age of free? Digital copies are easy to make. You can go on YouTube and find wonderful explanations of Euclid's, theorem, or whatever it is that you're interested in. So the issue is not of access. When copies are super abundant, they actually become worthless. When copies are super abundant, stuff which cannot be copied becomes scarce and valuable. So what is it that cannot be copied? And Kevin Kelly wrote this great essay a while back called Better Than Free. And he said there are these values that are generative. Those are qualities that must be generated, grown, cultivated, and nurtured. It cannot be copied, cloned, faked, replicated, counterfeited, or reproduced. A good example, as educators all will know, is trust. You cannot copy trust. You cannot buy it. It must be earned. It cannot be downloaded or faked or counterfeited. And here are some examples of uncopyable values. This is sort of my list. Yours may be different. But as educators, this, I think, is an important fact to keep in mind, is what we bring to the task. They are things like immediacy, accessibility, personalization, interpretation, embodiment, authenticity, community, belongingness and identity, vision and experience. So as we think about online learning, as we think about technology, we have to think about these uncopyable values and how we bring technology, pedagogy, and content together to make this happen. To sum up, we live in a new ecology where standard solutions don't work. It is about creativity and repurposing, and we get there not through some kind of magic, but a purposeful process of design. And as educators, we know that it is not about the technology, but yet, at least in this COVID times, it is about the technology. It is about how we bring content, pedagogy, and technology together in particular contexts to understand that there are many reasons for the global challenges we face today. And key among them, has been a failure to imagine what education can be. And this is a failure at a systemic level. We have an educational ecology that does not meet the needs of the future. And so the challenge facing education during COVID and beyond is not just to do a better job what it is already doing, but to do a fundamentally different job and hope that we can leave it better than we found it. Thank you very much. My name is Punya Mishra. I'm Associate Dean for Scholarship and Innovation, and this is my contact information. I look forward to further conversation and discussion after the presentation. Thank you.